Chapter 25 of the Life of Saint Teresa. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anne Boulay. The Life of Saint Teresa by Teresa of Jesus, translated by the Reverend John Dalton. Chapter 25. She treats of the way how those words and speeches are to be understood, which God communicates to the soul without any voice or sound being heard. I think it would be well to explain here what kind of speech that is which God makes use of to the soul, and what she feels, that so your reverence may understand it. For from the time when our Lord did me this favor, which I have mentioned, it often happens to me even now, as you will see by what follows. They are certain words very distinctly formed in the soul, which, though not heard with the corporeal ears, are understood much more expressly and clearly than if they were so heard. Nor can the soul avoid understanding them, and giving her whole attention to them. And it is useless to resist, however much we may strive. When in this world we do not wish to hear, we can stop our ears, or else attend to other things in such a way, that though we may hear the words, yet we shall not understand them. But when God speaks to the soul, there is no remedy whatever, but we are made to listen to the words whether we will or no, and the understanding is obliged to be very attentive, in order to comprehend them. Thus, whether we wish or no, God wishes we should understand Him, and because He is all-powerful, that which He resolves must be done, and so He is known as the true Lord of us all. Of this truth I have had much experience, for the resistance I made continued almost 2 years, on account of the fears I had. And even now I feel this fear sometimes, but resistance is of little use. I should be glad to mention the errors that may happen here, though it seems to me that a person who has great experience would commit few or none. But this experience must be great. I should also like to declare the difference which exists when the spirit is good, or when it is bad, or between that which comes from an imagination formed by the understanding itself, which may happen, or between what the soul says to herself. I know not whether this can happen or no, though even this very day I think it has happened so. When the words come from God, I have experienced their truth in many things which were told to me 2 or 3 years before. They all prove true, and till now not one has failed. There are also other things by which the Spirit of God is clearly seen, as I shall afterwards relate. To me it seems that a person who recommends something to God with great earnestness may fancy that he foresees whether the affair will succeed or not. This, I say, is very possible. But he who understands things in the other way of which I have spoken, will clearly discover what will happen, because there is a great difference between the 2 ways of hearing. And if it be something which the understanding forms, however delicately done, he understands that something is ordained and said. It is just like a person discoursing or listening to what another says, and the understanding will discover that it does not listen then, because it works. And the words which it frames are, as it were, mute and fantastical, and not delivered with the same clearness as those others were. And here it is in our power to turn our attention to something else, or to hold our peace when we speak. But in the other case, we have no such power. There is another sign much more important than all the rest. What is said by ourselves produces no effect. But when our Lord speaks, He utters both words and produces effects. And though they should not be words of devotion, but of reprehension, they immediately dispose the soul, they enable her to be affected, they enlighten her, regale her, and satisfy her. And should she be in a state of dryness, commotion, or disorder, these words take it all away, as it were, with the hand. Yea, and even much better than the hands could do. For it seems then our Lord wishes us to understand that He is powerful, and that His words are deeds. It seems to me that there is as much difference as there is between one speaking or hearing, neither more nor less. For what I speak I order, as I have mentioned, with my understanding. But if another speak to me, I do no more than hear, without any trouble at all to myself. In the first kind of words we cannot be certain if what we say be the truth, for we are like men half asleep. But the other words come from a voice so clear, that not one syllable of what is said is lost. And yet these things happen sometimes when both the understanding and the whole soul are in such great distraction and disorder, that they would never be able to form any reasonable discourse. But the soul finds in this other discourse certain great and important sentences, so well arranged, that though she were ever so perfectly recollected, she would be unable to produce such, and yet at the very first word thereof, as I have said, a total change is produced in her. Especially if the soul be in a rapture, when the powers are suspended, how will those things be understood which never came to her memory before? And how will they come then, when the memory does not act, and when the imagination has, as it were, become foolish? But here we must notice, that whenever either visions are seen or these words heard, it is never, in my opinion, at that time when the soul is absorbed in the rapture itself. For at those periods, as I think I mentioned when speaking of the second water, all the powers are entirely lost, and hence we can then, in my opinion, neither see, nor hear, nor understand. The soul is wholly in the power of another at that time, but only for a short time, and methinks our Lord does not give her any liberty then in anything. But when that short time has passed, the soul remains still in the rapture, and the reason is, because the powers remain in such a way that, though they are not lost, yet they hardly operate at all, but are as it were absorbed, and not able to perform any discourses. But there are so many ways of discovering the difference between what is true and false, that if the soul should be deceived once, it would not happen so often. I say also, that if the soul have any experience, and be careful in observing what passes, she will see the truth very clearly. For besides all the other ways whereby that will be seen which I have mentioned, these words produce no effect, nor does the soul admit them. But those which come from God she must receive, whether she will or no. Neither does she give any credit to the other words, but rather discovers that they are the effect of an idle imagination, just in the same way as we should pay no attention to whatever a madman might say to us. But the supernatural words are as if we were listening to some very holy or learned person of great authority, and such a one, we know, would not deceive us. But this is indeed a mean comparison, because these words sometimes bring with them such a great majesty, that without reflecting who it is that utters them, even should they be words of reprehension, they make us tremble, and should they relate to divine love, then they make the soul dissolve, as it were, in loving. And these are things which, as I have before mentioned, are far from our remembrance, and such deep sentences were so suddenly pronounced, that a long time would be required to have formed and arranged them. I think, then, it seems impossible that we ourselves should imagine we could form such words. There is no reason, then, why I should delay any longer on this point, for I think it would be a wonder if an experienced person could be deceived herein, unless he purposely wished to be deceived. It has often happened to me, if I were in any doubt, not to believe what was told me, but to think it was my own fancy. This I do when the occasion is past, but now it is impossible, for I have seen the words fulfilled a long time after, because our Lord is pleased the same should remain in the memory, for it cannot be forgotten. That which comes from the understanding is only the first movement, as it were, of our thought, which passes away and is forgotten. But the other is a work, rather than a word, and though some part of it may be forgotten in the course of time, yet the memory cannot lose it entirely, so as to forget what was said, unless it be a long time after, or except they be words of doctrine or words of favor. But if they relate to prophecy, in my opinion they can never be forgotten. At least this never happened to me, though I have a bad memory. I wish to repeat, that if a person be not so wicked as to take pleasure in deceiving himself, by being persuaded that he understands what he does not understand, it is impossible for him not to see clearly, that it is the soul who frames these words and speaks to herself, especially if she have any understanding at all of the spirit